Hi, everyone, and happy Friday. I'm meteorologist Brittany Van Voorhees here with WCNC Charlotte. Today was certainly a cloudier day across the region. We had temperatures in the 80s, and honestly, we have a lot to talk about. We have storms moving through the area right now. We, of course, need a tropical update. Plus, tonight is the one-year anniversary of Helene making landfall across the Big Bend of Florida. We know, of course, tomorrow is the anniversary for us here in the Western Carolinas of the impacts that we saw locally, because, again, the storm made landfall around 11 o'clock at night. So let's look at what's happening right now over the WCNC Charlotte tower camera. If you're familiar with the Charlotte area, our station is right by the airport, so just off Bailey Graham Parkway, and you can see as it looks toward the city, we are seeing some darkening sky conditions, largely because there is some rain to track. It is one of those days where we're tracking some showers as expected. We've been talking about the chance that rain would be heaviest Friday night and Saturday morning for a few days now, and pretty much here we are. So when you look at Saturday's forecast, I know that looks overspread for the entire area. It's because most spots will see rain at some point, but it's an overnight early event tomorrow, and then more rain and storms by the evening hours. Sunday, largely dry, but not completely dry. So here's the current setup. We have, of course, a trough of low pressure offshore that brought us rain yesterday for the mountains. And now the cold front that we've been tracking for a few days is now approaching the Charlotte area. So here's where the rain is right now. Again, you can see some heavier rain down toward Lancaster County, just south of Van Wyck, up toward Jackson, Great Falls. But as you creep closer to the Charlotte metro, again, notice just some light rain, some patchy drizzle, even in a few spots. That includes Rock Hill, TKK, Fort Mill, Lake Wiley, Pineville, Wesley Chapel, Waxhaw, Weddington, Monroe, Unionville, all the way up toward Big Lick and New Salem and parts of Albemarle. And then we do have one pocket here of some heavy rain. This is pretty much right between Poplar Tent in Harrisburg. If you know Poplar Tent, y'all, that's where the Renaissance Festival typically is. So there's heavy rain right there over Poplar Tent, kind of hugging, again, I-85. And then more rain is on the way there for Kannapolis. So just to give you a perspective there on where Poplar Tent is. And this is going to be moving up toward the China Grove area and eventually Salisbury over the next few hours. And then again, some lighter rain too on the eastern side of Union County. As we look ahead toward this evening, we are expecting a few more showers and storms possible, but more action, of course, expected too up in the mountains and foothills. So I know Vanessa's still up there with our Helene coverage, and she's probably seeing some rain there in Watauga County right about now. So again, as we enter the overnight hours, more chances for rain. It will be widespread at times, but heavy rain as well, moving into parts of the region. I say that because we could see light rain for everybody, but only a few pockets will be heavy. So not everybody sees that. Here's tomorrow at 5 o'clock. There's 11. So notice this is the midday lull I was mentioning. And then there we are again at 11 p.m. So it's not going to rain for a lot of the daytime hours, but early morning and again, more storms in the evening before we do dry out pretty nicely by Sunday. There will be a few sprinkles here and there and more clouds, but Sunday is certainly the pick of the week if you had to have one. And then here comes more rain on Monday, as of course we'll be tracking what's going on in the tropical Atlantic basin. So a lot to talk about here. And of course, if we don't get to anything, we'll have more time with Chief Meteorologist Tim Buckley coming up from WFMY. But we have Umberto there, still on the eastern side of this picture. It is still it is now a hurricane as of right now, happened earlier today. But now we have a new system, potential tropical cyclone number 9. This was Invest 94L that we were watching earlier this week. Now we get so many questions about what the heck potential tropical cyclone means. So back in the day, which this wasn't that long ago, but let's just say back in the day for semantics. So National Hurricane Center did not issue watches and warnings or put out a forecast track unless there was a tropical depression or named storm. So a few years ago, which normally when they put out new operational, things, there was probably time where they were experimental behind the scenes. But a few years ago, they started this, putting out a potential tropical cyclone. It gives them the opportunity to A, release an early forecast track, and B, issue watches and warnings for areas that could be impacted in the next 24 to 36 hours. Because let's say that you live in Myrtle Beach. I'm just using that as an example. I used to work there at the ABC station. What if there's a storm right off the coast that you know is there, that you know is going to bring impacts, but you have no tropical storm watches and warnings because it's not a depression or a named storm, because it just doesn't have the technical characteristics yet? Nobody wants that, right? So potential tropical cyclone is just their way to issue those watches and warnings, get a forecast track out earlier before a storm technically meets criteria to be a tropical depression or a tropical storm. So as we look long range in potential tropical cyclone 9, there are a lot of questions still. Yesterday, we looked at different scenarios. In my professional opinion, I think the scenario of completely staying out to sea looks very unlikely. But there is a chance that the storm gets close to the coast and then stays out to sea. But I don't think a zero impact scenario for the coastal Carolinas is on the table at this point. It will just be how many impacts. Does it stay offshore, but it gets close and brings us rain and maybe a little bit of surge, or does it move inland? So again, we're going to talk more about this, of course, with Tim coming up. There's those watches and warnings for the Bahamas. Again, that's the reason why we're going PTC 9. Here's the actual official forecast track from the National Hurricane Center. You can see in the near term through Monday at 2 p.m., you can see that 75 mile per hour. It's a Category 1 hurricane at that point based on this track, and there's a lot of certainty. Notice how skinny the track is. But as we look wider, when you see a big blob at the end of a forecast track like this, that shows uncertainty, which we've talked a lot about the uncertainty in the forecast track. So right now, the 5-day cone has anywhere from Jacksonville, Florida, up toward Jacksonville, North Carolina. And if you're familiar with that, there is a Marine base there. So that's near the Fayetteville area. So keep in mind, there's a lot of uncertainty still here. I want to show you some model data just to show you guys the difference in where some of these models have the storm. I will preface this by saying that this is not an official forecast, but this comes from the GFS, the American model, and you can see some heavy rain for Charlotte and area south. However, the European model keeps a lot of this a little bit further north and some better rainfall potential for areas in the Queen City and maybe over towards places like Chirra, Myrtle Beach. So Euro's a little bit further up north and northeast with the heaviest rain, but the European has also tracked a little bit further offshore, and I'll show you that here in just a second. So here's the current GFS model with winds. There's Tuesday morning around midnight, some tropical storm force winds for Myrtle Beach, Charleston, and then the storm moves inland, and that could cause some tropical storm force winds for places like Charlotte and Columbia. However, as we look at the European model, the latest, I'm going to show you something interesting. All right, notice this. It's got a stronger storm. Notice the Charleston wind gusts, Myrtle Beach wind gusts around 60 miles an hour. But do you see where that circle goes? I'm going to back it up in just a second. We're going to look at it again. So here's that 64 mile per hour gust. That's Tuesday morning. Circle goes toward the coast and then boom, goes away. So the European is picking up on that potential that it gets close, but then it jots out to sea. So again, this is what I mean by impacts, even if it doesn't actually make landfall, because a complete turn out to sea at this point looks relatively unlikely because of the fact that the storm gets close to the Carolinas, which means, again, even if it stays out to sea, we're still seeing some impacts along the coast and inland. Now, if you are wondering why the Euro is picking up on that jot out to sea, that would indicate that Umberto, as we've talked about, is going to try to use the Fujiwara effect and pull the storm away. That would be a higher influence from Umberto pulling it away. That's the European. Whereas Imelda, which is likely the name that this storm gets, moving inland is closer to what the GFS is showing, the American, which is pulling it in because of that upper level low. So again, we talked about this yesterday, and Tim actually used a really good explanation, I think, here, where the two were playing tug of war, right? The upper level low and Umberto were playing tug of war. It's who will win out that is largely going to depend on what happens here. Umberto, now being a hurricane, definitely is going to help it try to pull that storm out to sea. But again, there's still a lot of question marks. As Chief Meteorologist Brad Panovich and I talked about earlier, this could bring impacts to us here in Charlotte in terms of heavy rain and some gusty winds, or it could be a big ol' nothing burger. So there is still a lot of scenarios still on the table. But again, I still think impacts will happen in the Carolinas regardless, because even if that close proximity happens and here in Charlotte we don't get any changes, it will still bring something, right? Rain, storm surge, higher wave heights, current risk. So again, there's still a lot of questions. I went a little bit over my time, so we're going to talk more about this with Chief Meteorologist Tim Buckley coming up here in just a second. For now, we're going to take a quick 2-minute break, and I hope you'll join us on the other side for more tropics coverage and a look back at the National Weather Service's forecast of Hurricane Helene upon the 1-year anniversary.